Where does learning take place? What does the architecture of schools say about our accepted and rejected identities across time? How do we best educate others? To answer these questions and more, I traveled to Rome with a mission: to research, understand, and contextualize the transformation of their educational systems across time. This knowledge would be a gateway for me to develop answers and even more questions to a larger inquiry I have always had and currently study, which is the purpose of education. What is it? What society are we looking to create, and what do we think are the best ways to go about it? To a college sophomore like myself, the globe is a vast, heavily unexplored place of cultures, mysteries, and people to meet and understand. Rome is not necessarily representative of the state of education across the entire world, but the city certainly became my starting point to understand education across cultures and along history. Throughout the 2 weeks I spent in Rome, meeting and interviewing locals, visiting historic sites, and analyzing my observations, one theme united the entirety of my experience: human connection. The question of where learning takes place is not as important as the question of how and when. I could be studying in Rome, or back home in Southern California, or taking a break from school and working on a farm. In any of these cases, I am learning so long as I perceive the world as a student should, with an open mind, an open heart, and a willingness to ask questions and an insatiable curiosity that simply observes and searches for more to know and not know. In that case, perhaps learning is aware, in that it can happen anywhere, at any time. On our second full day in Rome, we took tram 8 from Trastevere north to its final stop, Piazza Venezia. As we turned away from the bustle of the cars and tourists into the quiet of the Roman Forum, our feeling was captured no better than by the words of our guide Paolo. Every single step is a step back into the past, century by century. I suddenly became hyper-aware of the quality of my steps as we descended down the slope into the past and what it would bring us, readily accepting the city, new to me but old to many others, as my classroom for the following 2 weeks. Indeed, archaeologists have determined that ancient Roman classrooms were not commonplace because of how school for them tended to take place anywhere. There was no need for a physical school with lines of desks and a chalkboard of some kind at the front of the room because children instead studied either privately with teachers in their homes or, more often, outdoors in public spaces. School, like any small ancient business, could be held on the street, under or above a portico, near an important public building such as a temple, or at a rented shop. Suetonius, a historian and writer during the early imperial era of the Roman Empire, seemed to define school not so much as a particular space dedicated to instruction, as it was a master, a distinct curriculum, and a number of students. In personally experiencing the city of Rome and all its layers of stories, culture, and identities, I began to understand the value of our learning taking place not only outside in the open air among the bustle of the city, but additionally with an almost minimalist mindset, where our professors and guides joined forces with us students, alongside the structure of individual goals or curricula, so that we could all engage in learning and understanding. We came across ruins of the Hearth of Vesta among the Forum. The hearth had once held the sacred flame which the Vestal virgins had to keep from going out. Next to the temple of Vesta was the residence of the 6 virgin priestesses. The house of the Vestals was on 2 floors, with rooms that opened onto a porticoed courtyard decorated with statues in honor of the chief Vestals. The first story of the building was for classrooms, while the second story was for bedrooms. According to Paolo, girls aged 8 to 10 years old had been allowed to attend the school. By 30, they could be chosen to be priestesses of Vesta, contributing to the prototype of a monastery. Like nuns, these women were shunned from having sex. In fact, if they were caught doing so, they would be put to death. Deemed impure, this would be done through jailing them in an underground cell and left for death. Standing here, we could see the ruins of what this building would have been, and I thought about how, in spite of the peaceful nature of the courtyard and the harmless greenery, contemporary times grant individuals, in developed countries at least, more structure to fight the institutionalization of racism, sexism, and ableism in our schools. The priestesses of Festa were most likely as educated as women could be in ancient Rome, yet were subject to objectifying limits of their character based on standards of personal life that were most certainly decided by the privileged men in their society. In their writings, Plato and Aristotle seem to imply that education, and certainly higher education, was something that could practically and appropriately be given only to those whose natural endowments and circumstances in life fitted them to assimilate the training properly and put it to good use. And it is plain that they were not thinking in terms of universal, uniform, free education. Education was not something for slaves, or for manual laborers, or, at some places and times, for women. The complexities of inequality within ancient Roman society were structural and supported by the privileged men of society. Education was used as a tool for these men to maintain their own privilege, power, and social agency. Experiencing and understanding history is not merely about the facts and knowledge, but rather about realizing who we are as humans. This became clearer to me in exploring the multitudes of classical Roman sculptures, mosaics, and jewelry at the Palazzo Massimo, an archaeological museum with centuries of cultural and aesthetic history. We discovered the marble sculpture La Niobide by Horti Salustani, dated to the 5th century BCE. This statue, as explained by our guide Valentina, depicts a daughter of Niobe wounded by an arrow that had been shot by one of the twin gods Apollo or Artemis. Latona, the mother of the twins Apollo and Artemis, had ordered for Niobe's 7 daughters and 7 sons to be killed after having been offended at Niobe's boasts of her own prolificacy. La Niobide is not meant to be a source of aesthetic enjoyment, but rather as a representation of the agony guaranteed for those mortals who dared to challenge the gods. Romans of pagan practices taught one another to respect the hierarchy of life, inclusive of mortals and immortals alike. Early Roman tradition favored family teaching over institutional education. During the Roman Republic, no government regulations existed for education as the state believed that life should dictate the curriculum. Both mothers and fathers were teachers, the father's influence being paramount. And the goal of education was to imbue knowledge to make children, especially sons, useful to the state and represent their families. Many of the countless stories derived from the Greco-Roman mythological canon would have been instrumental in informally educating young citizens-to-be on the ethics involved with life as humans. Specifically, through practicing respect and obedience to the gods, a Roman citizen also learns to practice respect and obedience to the state and its respective leaders. This ensures a well-functioning society where the social order is acknowledged, adhered to, and maintained. Not far from the Colosseo, in the medieval layers underneath the Basilica di San Clemente, we found an 11th century fresco depicting a hagiography, or a saint's biography, of Saint Clement. This fresco, created between the 9th and 11th centuries CE, is one of the earliest written samples of archaic Italian, then known as vulgare, the people's language, during the time that Latin had been the state's official language used by the aristocrats. In this fresco, after Sicinius' wife, Theodora, recently converted to Christianity, Sicinius decides to follow her to church out of spite and jealousy. However, he is struck blind and deaf when he arrives and is led out by his servants. At Theodora's request, Clement goes to their home to cure Sicinius through prayer. But when he wakes up, Sicinius takes Clement for a magician and adulterer and orders his servant. Sicinius takes Clement for a magician and adulterer and orders his servants to seize him. The final miracle of this story is that the servants instead grab a stone column rather than Clement. The speech bubbles in the bottom panel read, with Sicinius on the right, "Pull, you sons of whores," and Clement's response, "Because of the hardness of your heart, you have deserved to pull stones." The legend of Clement and Sicinius is representative of a kind of double rhetoric concerning converting pagans which is often found in early Christian texts. This comic fresco suggests that whether or not a Christian manages to convert a pagan to Christianity, the fault does not lie with lack of truth or righteousness on the part of the Christians. It lies with a condition controlled only by God, that is, the state of others' compassion. This lesson was for the early Christians to realize the importance of maintaining one's own devotion to God in the midst of other people's lack thereof. If I were to interpret this through a more secular lens, I would say that this piece of art can inform the viewer of the significance of maintaining compassion and open-mindedness toward others, even if it is challenged or rejected. This makes for a society in which people look out for each other, see the best in each other, and refuse to indulge in selfish decisions that jeopardize harmony among everyone. Whether or not my interpretation was necessarily what the creator of this 1,000-year-old fresco intended for me to realize, my understanding of the fresco, in my own words, was part of my educational experience. Ancient and medieval Rome were not educational only because of their age, but because I walked up to these ancient and significant locations with curiosity, humility, and a desire to understand. Education might be able to take place anywhere at all, but the opportunity to learn is only activated if the participating humans, students and educators alike, bring to the table contextualization and personal significance. For a taste of more formal medieval Roman education, we only had to walk 2 minutes across the street to the Basilica e Monastero Agostiniano. Passing through a high-walled courtyard that swiftly distanced us from the outside world, we entered a smaller entryway that resembled a lobby or waiting room of sorts. As we rang the bell and waited for a nun to greet us through the tiny barred window, our guide Valentina pointed out a large, seemingly innocuous wooden bin in the wall. I guessed, and correctly, that women would used to come by and drop off their babies for adoption in return for food during difficult times. After we explored the medieval frescoes of the small basilica, we had the chance to see the fountain and garden pocketed within the monastery just before they were about to close. I found that the arched hallways, quiet fountain, and simple greenery established a truly serene atmosphere that I was not quite ready to leave. The changing, dangerous world outside was far from my view, and here I had a taste of stillness and simplicity that maybe, if I stayed for long enough, its safety would become mine. In early modern Rome, it was not uncommon for Catholic institutions to offer shelter and education to young women, especially those from poverty-stricken families and marginalized groups, in order to help them marry and live respectably rather than become plunged into prostitution as an adolescent. These institutions sought to create a formative and educational space during the malleable years of youth in order to facilitate young women's transition into adulthood by providing religious instruction, needlework, music, and basic literacy skills. Through the seclusive, yet authoritative, decisive, and serene architecture of the Monastero Agostiniano, I experienced a taste of Rome's medieval educational philosophy for women. From the point of view of the clergy, families, and society, the best-case scenario for young Roman women in the Middle Ages might have been to take refuge in a place like this, as long as they retained their virginity, and become educated even if they lived in seclusion from society. If the city outside was a world of immorality, suffering, and sin, then they had all incentives to stay in this sanctuary. Returning to the outside world, we visited Sapienza University of Rome, much of which is situated in this area called a university city, built in Rome during the mid-1930s under Benito Mussolini and designed by Marcello Piacentini, the architect of fascism. The architecture of this period revisited aspects of ancient Roman architecture, parallel to the fact that during the Italian fascist period, classical culture was co-opted by the fascist party's propaganda system as one of the tools of fabricating consent. The purpose of remembering the past was to regenerate the present in order to secure the future, transferring it to a sort of third Rome of fascism. This is seen by the use of square rather than round columns on structures such as that of the Palazzo del Rettorato. Latin inscriptions are engraved into many of the buildings, such as education promotes an innate vigor and morals give physical strength to the spirit. Stepping foot onto this campus had a similar feeling to that of exploring our large public universities near my home, such as USC and UCLA, save for the fascist history. Indeed, much of those universities' designs back home seemed to have been inspired by European architecture anyway. But experiencing Sapienza's campus felt more historically raw in comparison, and at the same time more casual because perhaps it was just another university with other college students studying just like I did in a democratic nation. During the Italian fascist regime, universities adopted a highly authoritarian structure in order to communicate the conformist mentality and exercise ideological control that began in primary school. The purpose of education then was thus to maintain control over the people, instate social order, and demolish deviance. This was easier done if the participants consented to and believed in this system, desiring to make their country the best in the world. This was represented by the fasci, the bundle of sticks featuring an axe, representing strength in numbers and unity. I did not personally spot a fascist symbol built into Sapienza's campus, but fascist architecture is made recognizable throughout Rome, often with the fasci, as well as numbers that represented the year. For example, A19. A stands for anno, meaning year, and the 19 stands for the 19th year of the fascist regime, which began in 1922. A building with anno 19 would have been built in 1941. According to Dr. Pacchioni, San Lorenzo was the only neighborhood that, at the incoming imposition of Italian fascism in 1922, rejected its arrival. The rise of the Me Too movement, specifically in Rome, had also begun at the university, where mere blocks away in San Lorenzo, there is a street artwork called Mural Against Femicide. It stretched as far as the eye could see to the end of the block and presumably beyond. White figures on a pink background, each paper doll cutout represented a female victim of violence. All of them together emanated the feeling of a complex and strikingly powerful army. It was said one way or another during our tour of the university that the spirit of the university permeates the spirit of the neighborhood, and perhaps this was just one simple piece of evidence. Back on Sapienza's campus, we paused to converse at one point, and two university students were in the midst of taping up a poster for an anti-war demonstration hosted by an organization called National Cycle of Anti-War Initiatives. The poster featured a cartoon of President Trump and represented a movement opposed to his recent attacks on Iran that killed Major General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's most powerful military commander. More importantly, this represented a movement largely opposed to war of any kind. I was impressed by the confidence with which these students claimed the space of their campus as their own in order to advocate for what society should be: self-aware, human-centered, and proactive in the name of peace. The university motto is "The future was here," and these students were assertively following through and taking charge of their own futures, because who else would? Following the poster source, the political science department was one of the most interesting experiences on Sapienza's campus. Just outside the entrance, flowers adorned the memorial plaques of deceased social activists. We turned the corner and a huge, bold, spray-painted sign read, "Welcome to the Anti-Fascist, Feminist, United Political Science Department." I gleefully snapped a photo, finding it beautiful and precious to have in an educational setting. This was a direct and potentially unanimous declaration of the self-determination expressed by these students, and I wondered whether these beliefs had arisen either because of or in spite of the city's fascist history that underlay the very brickwork of the campus. In the courtyard outside were students talking together in groups amidst artwork that said, "Armed against everything that does not make you free, rebel against everything that chains you," as well as "Insieme," or together.
You can know many people with many ideas and they could form your thinking, but the school doesn't do it as a goal. For example, you spend so much time studying Greek and Latin, but I never studied how the Italian rule system works. And that's very important in order to form someone that is a citizen, that will be a future citizen. Italians are very quick at change their mind. So you can find every kind of idea, even the really bad ideas, of course. That's why probably we have again a problem about fascist movements, even if fascism ended so much time ago. We never condemned a former idea so strongly to make it forgotten or make everyone understand that that was bad. So please avoid in future.
This was from a conversation with Alessandro, a university student I interviewed in order to find out more about educational life in Rome. His school experience has played a large role in shaping who he is and what he believes in, especially in terms of realizing what it means to decide his own political identity and beliefs for himself. Even though the direct instructions for independency may not have institutionally been present for him, he managed to develop his own path and recognize independent thought for himself. I had a conversation with another Sapienza student named Matteo. In Italy, after middle school, students have the option to attend specific high schools where they may specialize in an area of their choosing. This is a different system than that of America, where it is not as expected to attend such a specialized school at such a young age. In my experience, that is a decision that has been typically reserved for the college application period around the age of 17 to 18.
The mistake is that we have to choose too soon. When I was 13, I didn't even know who I was, I was so unsure about me, and when I was not sure, I chose to go to the school of my brothers. I'm sure I go to the gymnasium that is,
more general.
Yes, yeah. It's more general. Yeah. I thought for a long time that was my problem, that I did everything wrong. But right now, I'm 25, I think the system is wrong, because I couldn't know what I liked.
In this instance, the opportunity for independent choice did not automatically serve Matteo well. This forced me to consider, how should educational spaces balance influence and independence? A week after these conversations, Dr. Pacchioni and I visited the Montessori school in Quartiere Africano, attended by pre-elementary and elementary school students and founded by an educator who had studied the Montessori method with Dr. Maria Montessori. Inside, we spoke with Carla, who graciously offered her time after a full day of teaching to speak with me and Dr. Pacchioni, who would serve as our translator, about the Montessori method, practice, and experience. Dr. Maria Montessori, who graduated from Sapienza University when it was an all-boys school, began her work as a physician and scientist. In 1906, she was invited to create a child care center in San Lorenzo, and in 1907, the first Casa dei Bambini, meaning children's home, opened. The method she developed, tested, and published over the years emphasizes learning through movement and the senses in order to promote independence and autonomy in its students. Montessori schools in Italy are public and were originally always meant to be, which is not consistently the case in the United States or China, where the Montessori method also became popular. Because of the more competitive natures of countries like the US and China, those Montessori schools themselves have changed to cater to this competitive spirit. They might give off the image of a private, prestigious school for children who get pushed ahead of the curve, and parents send their children there in order to achieve that success.
The problem with this is that it's really in contradiction with the spirit of the Montessori as it started here, and they continue to be faithful to this vision, which is more complex. It's not just about success of the child, but the success in terms of the child in society towards a larger objective, which is the objective of peace. Ci può raccontare meglio magari la transizione?
Indeed, Dr. Montessori went through 2 world wars and was thus very interested in the idea of peace. She was even a candidate 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1949, 1950, and 1951.
The idea of independence is also connected to the idea of responsibility in the child. So the child is going to be a responsible citizen and is going to be aware of the relationship between people, but also between people and nature. And one wonderful idea that is part of her philosophy, she used to say, the child is the father of man.
This belief was to mean that the children we care for and educate today become the humanity of tomorrow, generation after generation. They will be the ones impacting the world and passing on their own values, so we must foster their inner passions and humanity while we still have the chance. In the end, by choosing a school, whether for yourself or for your child, we inherently choose how we wish our society to be shaped. Even educators inherently influence the futures of their students on a daily basis, whether one lectures minute by minute or steps back and facilitates student learning through observation and just necessary interactions. Educators are the ones who dictate whether a student has succeeded or failed during class. Students are the ones who can choose to pursue these standards or reject them in favor of their own. Where does self-determination truly lie in the midst of this process? When Carla asked me why I came to Rome to research my specific project, I was honestly overwhelmed with all my memories and experiences that had led me to that moment. This is what I said.
And I'm really drawn to the Montessori school because it feels so liberating, and it feels so, like, I think the goal of peace is just, it's completely profound to me, because with my public school education, the goal has always been to get money and to get a job and to just get school done with and not care about anyone or anything. Mm-hmm. And I want to change that so much, but in America it's so hard.
Lynn sta studiando, facendo una doppia laurea.
Reflecting on the competitive nature of the American public education system, which I both have experienced and studied, I am tired of the robotic nature that public school can adopt, solely for the societally imposed expectations of training students to get good test scores, obtain a job, and make money for the economy. Of course, students should still have preparation for their adult careers, but it should not be the sole purpose behind going to school. Education has to be key in unlocking the humanity and worldly compassion of which we are all capable. The intellect and creativity we should be developing in schools is what we should be using to give back to the world, not necessarily in terms of money and services, but in terms of unity and personal responsibility. To me, that is what it means to be educated. Back in the San Lorenzo district, a mere block or two from the mural against femicide, is the original Casa dei Bambini, founded by Dr. Maria Montessori in 1907. As is normal in Rome, colorful graffiti and street art filled the walls of the surrounding neighborhood. Dr. Pacchioni and I silently stepped through the doorway of the apartment building where the school was embedded. The shadows of the initial hallway gave way to an open-aired courtyard with a small garden featuring various trees and greenery. It certainly felt very peaceful. There was a calm quiet, with fresh air but no wind, and the rest of the world was outside. Distantly, as though in a whispered dream, music and dance could be heard softly from inside the school. I thought about connection and being interconnected, and I imagined humans listening to the needs of each other, and I imagined the feeling of just listening. On the day we visited the Flaminio district, we met Alessandro Fabrizi, the founder of Festa di Teatro e Logico, a summer theater festival taking place on the Italian island of Stromboli. It is a full week of unplugged performances and workshops that consume zero electricity. As a theater, in addition to an education student myself, I was in wide-eyed awe as he described his festival. Raw human connection is every theater practitioner's ultimate and all-consuming goal. Every part of the theatrical process, whether devising, playwriting, directing, performing, designing, all of it is for the purpose of bringing humans together for learning and catharsis. But as a young theater creator who is well accustomed to such elaborate processes of set design, lights, and speakers, I was slightly skeptical of how effective this festival truly could be. Sometimes advanced technical elements make theater productions all the more wonderful to be a part of. However, I took a step back and listened to the true goal of this festival, which was to enhance our human connection to natural scenery, our environments, and other people, rather than to look fancy and make money.
200 years ago, if you can speak in the, like countrymen speaking in the fields, calling each other in the square, things that we've lost. Or kings and princes in these big halls, they would talk from one end of the room to the other end of the room, certainly with no microphone. And And we're losing that capability of connecting through the voice and through the body because of electric devices, I think. As everything, probably this is a natural evolution, but I and the people who work with me at the festival, we feel that it's good to have a place where you can still experience a human connection without the medium of electronic devices.
When he was 10 years old, Alessandro and his friend wrote a play during class. His teacher noticed and encouraged them to show it to the principal, eventually gaining approval and resources to stage and produce it in the school's theater auditorium. As he told us this story, Alessandro pointed out the elementary school where it had all taken place. He said that ever since then, if he feels like his playwriting or theater work is not coming as easily to him, he recalls that his 10-year-old self created and produced a play, and so anything must be possible. Hearing about a teacher being so supportive and life-changing to a young child this way was very compelling to me. I can only hope to use my own arts, theater, and education training to inspire students to similarly pursue their crafts with vigor and determination. It was like a dream to hear about Alessandro's work in theater, dance, and performing arts education because talking to him allowed me to realize how difficult true human connection can seem on a daily basis. I felt like he was reminding me that I am an artist as much as I am an aspiring educator, and that human connection is a tool that we all have simply by being humans. One of the most inescapable aspects of life in a big city is the ensuing loneliness that contradicts the density and population of inhabitants and neighbors, but pervades individuals' minds nonetheless. I had a taste of this loneliness firsthand as I wandered the streets of Rome by myself on many evenings, seeing new people at every corner but knowing they all spoke a different language and lived differently than I usually did. An even more inescapable aspect of daily life in Rome is passing by the graffiti and street art that decorates practically every single wall, regardless of the area you are in. It makes the city walls feel much more human and much more alive. In the neighborhood of Ostiense, an artist named Blue created some street art distinctly representative of the unique experience of loneliness that can be provoked by human life. Yet, on some portions of this art, graffiti taggers had blatantly written their names. Blue's art was introduced and explained by Amir Issa, a second-generation Italian rapper and music artist. He also teaches Italian language to English speakers via his lyrics, focusing on the contemporary rather than on the historical. He used to be a graffiti writer and explained the underlying politics of street art versus graffiti tagging. Street art colloquially represents freedom, integration, and left-wing connotations, whereas graffiti writing represents egotism, territoriality, and right-wing connotations. Impressive street art, like those murals on Via delle Conche, can add value to residential properties for better if the intent is to help immigrant communities, or for worse. In any case, Amir stated, "When you make art, you live forever because your art lives on." I began to draw even more connections from artistry to humanity to education. Meeting Amir reminded me of a conversation I had with Dr. Pacchioni a different morning, as we discussed my gradual acquisition of Italian language basics. Though I speak several other languages, I had never spoken Italian before coming to Rome, and was comparing my hopeless frustration the first several days with my joy at gradually acquiring basic Italian over time and effort the next few days. He said, "It almost feels like it is the language that is speaking you, rather than the other way around." Along the same lines, as I grow to understand artistry as a language in and of itself, I seek to more thoroughly use its power to express my own truths more effectively. With language as an art, and with art as a language, we can inspire emotional connection through the senses. With education, we can inspire intellectual connection through understanding and personal growth among both educators and students. If we work to combine the emotionality of art, the intellect involved in education, and the truthful human connection that is integral to the senses and linguistic communication, humans stand to promote a clear path to a genuinely peaceful and still complex society. In the neighborhood of Testaccio, situated on the site of a former slaughterhouse and brewery, Mattatoio has become a city for the arts. Entering through the gates, the popular music school of Testaccio was on our right, an elderly resource center was on our left. a university architecture department if we went further along the right, and La Pelanda, an educational arts resource center if we went further along the left. We entered the informational area of the organization, where construction of an art gallery in the main room was in progress. If you looked up, you could see the dark, rusted slaughterhouse rails still trailing the infrastructure of the building. However, the walls were white and clean and new, and the room was filled with colorful pamphlets and friendly staff members. La Pelanda provides a wide spectrum of educational opportunities and artistic career support all around Rome, as well as through their own specific classes they offer. These services are not just for Italian citizens, but also for students like us who might come here to study in Italy. Arts education programs are necessary in every community, as young generations need to be encouraged and supported in practicing art to express their identities as well as to connect with others. At Campo Boario, a space nearby La Pelanda, was the Centro Socio-Culturale Ararat, founded in 1999. Activists had occupied the previously abandoned building to transform it into a welcoming space for hospitality, artistic and cultural collaboration, civil solidarity, and transformation of their territory. The building was named after the legendary mountain on which Noah's Ark escaped the universal flood, rescuing all the animal and plant species on the planet, as well as the name of the first ship loaded with Kurdish refugees arrived in Italy. Ararat is also, and above all, the mountain symbol of the Kurds and Armenians, peoples oppressed and dispersed by Turkish repression. Collaborations between Kurdish refugees, guests of the center, and external volunteers have self-managed and self-financed this space to the point of regularizing a lease with the municipality. This sense of community becomes fundamental in order not to feel completely lost after having crossed the border of one's country with the prospect of never to return, nor to be able to return for a very long period. The communication of the reasons for exile to the host society, but also beauty and historical value of the culture of origin, can be significant means of empowerment for people who have lost a lot and were forced to leave much behind. This was a place where we could truly experience the sense of creating something new, of taking an abandoned space and transforming it into something that impacts the world and was not only useful but more so liberating. Experiencing the sense of rebellious, artistic, and cultural solidarity of the spaces we found in Mattatoio, La Pelanda, and Ararat, I felt the all-encompassing presence not only of a community standing up for itself, but of one standing up for others. Within these environments, individuals learn and share how to take political, social, and cultural responsibility for themselves and others. These organizations work together to educate the community on their passions, their needs, and their goals. Without question, promoting peace and community is the most prominent goal of these everlasting processes facilitated by all of its participants. I chose to end my story with our time spent in these spaces in Testaccio because of how hopeful they made me feel. I realized that wherever I was in the world, I would be able to find people who fundamentally care about each other and who encourage the rest of the world to do the same. People who reclaim spaces of superiority, xenophobia, or hatred, and instead choose compassion. Taking into account the complexity of the world, its issues, and its people, there will always be challenges to our unity and human understanding of each other. We cannot upright inequalities or even completely understand them in just one day. We have to take the time and space to stand together and create these opportunities for understanding, as well as teach our future generations to not only do the same, but to do better. My 2-week quest through Rome concludes here. But my personal journey of learning and growing will indefinitely continue. When thinking out my research plan before arriving in the city, I had planned to basically ask everyone in Rome, what do you think the purpose of education is, and then compile all the results into a spreadsheet and see what came up the most. But I very quickly realized that this question was too complex for just about everyone to have a full answer within one conversation. Most people just don't think about all of the deep philosophical attributes of schooling on a daily basis. Instead, Rome had much more to show me. What its ancient artists and philosophers thought about society, what the layers of religious history invoke in citizens, what people prioritize, people's lived childhood experiences throughout school and their conflicts of interest among these educational settings, and the choices people and communities make for themselves and each other. None of this could have been summarized through statistical analysis of a specific number of interviews in order to account for a small enough margin of error. I am an artist, and might one day be an educator. There is no reason to treat education like a math equation. Education is the most human issue, and it has to be understood in the most human way, through human connection.